My grandpa Abe was a dairy farmer in rural Pennsylvania. When he retired at 70, he'd built a profitable enough enterprise to get bought out by farmland partners who added Abraham's Dairy to their portfolio of 300 farms. This prompted his friends to start calling him Milk Money. He didn't keep the sobriquet for long. Urged on by my mother, my dad convinced Grandpa Abe to grant him power of attorney and make him his legal guardian. My parents robbed him of his dignity and a well-funded retirement earned by the sweat of his brow. When Grandpa Abe died, he had nothing, or almost nothing. He had me. I visited Grandpa Abe in each of his final days, during which he'd spend his foreshortened future enmeshed in his past. We whiled away hours in old photo albums, a mother lode of lineless faces and hale and hearty bodies. I was privy to the choicest documentary evidence of his history. Grandpa Abe knocked me nervous before square dancing with my grandma at the Harvest Festival. Yellowed Polaroids of aunts and uncles beaming mugs behind cousins bounced on knees. The various tableau of fellow farmers and wives, flanked by their tribes and sitting around a 40-setting Thanksgiving table. This last, the only earthly proof that Grandpa Abe's sweat-banded baseball cap could be removed from his head. My parents didn't visit him once. The only time my dad even deigned to speak of his father was to complain about dispersing Grandpa Abe's own money to the retirement home to buy the old coot's diapers. My parents weren't bad people, but they were mean people. Well, no. To be honest, they were both bad and mean people. And even as a little girl, I understood that I would never be like them. Not if I could help it. If I was going to be like anybody in my family, it was Grandpa Abe. When I was in 5th grade, there was a kid in my class named Jay Hassfurther who was hospitalized after a pretty nasty accident. Jay wasn't the brightest bulb in the box, and dim as he was, gave little thought to chasing a foul ball into a wheat thresher. Versions of the story vary as to whether Jay caught the ball before the thresher took his fingers and half his hand. The Hassfurthers were, truth be told, a tribe of tweakers, cousin-loving inbreds, and moonshining reprobates, and weren't much liked in my town. I figured Grandpa Abe didn't like them either, a reasonable assumption in light of the rumor that Jay's dad, P. Hassfurther, poisoned my grandpa's cob mare and 2 of her foals. Generally speaking, folks who go around poisoning mama horses and their babies aren't well liked. I asked Grandpa Abe, knowing what he knew about the Hassfurthers, why we should stoop to sit bedside and chat with a congenital degenerate, mangled hand or not. We're going there because we're not better than the Hassfurthers. The falsity of this statement seemed self-evident, but I was willing to hear him out. If we visit him, he said, then maybe other people will visit him too. We're gone, tell the Hassfurthers they got help if they want it. And then maybe other people will offer their help too. It ain't easy to lift people up, but you want to be real careful that you don't push them down neither. We're visiting a kid who got his hand caught in a dang wheat thresher. Hannibal Lecter, he is not. Who's Hannibal Lecter? You ever heard the saying, "There but for the grace of God go I"? I nodded. Did Hannibal Lecter say that? Number definitely not. Do you know what that means? He asked. I shook my head, then added, Mom says the Hassfurthers are white trash creeps. There, but for the grace of God go I. Grandpa, did Jay's dad rat poison your horses? Listen, he said, sighing, shaking his head. First of all, Mr. Hassfurther is a troubled man. Troubled men trouble themselves worst, followed by their family, and then, as the case may be, other people's horses. Second of all, the world is a better place, and you will be happier in it if you try to love the so-called white trash creeps. The world only sees freaks where people insist freaks can be seen. You got to love your enemies. Be good to the freaks. Love your enemies. Be good to the freaks, I said, repeating the benediction. He nodded. If you can, kiddo. If you can, try. You can always try. You get me? Yeah, Grandpa. I think so. I looked out the window of his crew cab, watching heifers graze in their pasture, abandoned grain silos like battered warriors with rusted armor, the billowing fairy dust pink and golden wheat dusk. I sat and looked and quietly thought to myself. Those sure were some pretty horses, though, I eventually said. He sighed again. There's nothing about what I told you that requires hiring P. Hassfurther as a horse sitter. I don't got a horse to sit for anyway. Maybe one day. A pony? He laughed. We'll see. We'll see. I carried that memory with me when I moved to the city, with its worker bees buzzing between towers caked in grime, greyhound virgins chancing their wheelie bags in back alley shortcuts smelling of bum's piss, junkies gyrating in society's neon-lit, demilitarized zone while LED billboards flash like giant hazard lights, warning the rubes to keep a safe distance while civilization tries to parallel park in too tight a spot. And I kept it with me when I started waitressing at the diner, listening to brokers moonlighting as shock jocks talking about where they'd like to put their dicks on or inside me, while I got paid no more and no less than the requisite 2 pennies to rub together, 1 copper cent kicked back to my boss, Mr. Affendulis, who let his windowless basement to me off the books. If there was ever a place to be good to the freaks and love your enemies, it was here in the city. I only wish that Grandpa Abe added another valuable lesson to the one I learned the day we went to visit J. Hassfurther, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There was an old man, a true early bird, who favored the first leg of my split shift for his breakfast. He came in the small hours, before the legions of working stiffs chained themselves to their desks, when even sanitation workers and morning news anchors hadn't drunk their first cup of Joe. He was there and gone before the dawn, while our skeleton crew, me, Heather at the register, and Felix and Edgar, the Ecuadorian brothers running the kitchen, held down the chrome and vinyl fort. The old man wore, with no variation from one day to the next, a houndstooth trench coat, a scarf and trilby hat that covered his whole face except for his eyes, and kid gloves. The first time I saw him was in the last days of an Indian summer, air hotter than hell and thicker than shit. I knew then that there was no way anyone in their right mind would be dressed the way he was. Follow that to its logical conclusion. Hey, hon, I said, what can I get for you? He didn't answer, only stared at me. Heather was quick to come over from her perch at the register, talking over my shoulder while she nudged her way in. Good morning, Mr. Krepesky. This is Riva. She turned towards me. Mr. Krepesky is a regular, before turning back to Mr. Krepesky to ask, You need the menu? Mr. Krepesky shook his bundled head. He rolled his left hand up in a fist and tapped the back of it with 2 of his starboard fingers. Heather repeated his gesture to me. This means his usual, a very large matzo ball soup with extra matzo balls. Edgar and Felix know him. Okay? Yeah, of course. No problem, I said, then thought to add, What if Edgar and Felix aren't here when I'm working? Heather whispered to me behind her hand. If Edgar and Felix aren't here, it means the 4 horsemen have arrived and the apocalypse has begun. If that happens, you're on your own." She turned back to Mr. Krepesky. "Do you need a paper and pen?" Mr. Krepesky shook his head and tapped his chest where I suppose the welt pocket was inside his coat. I thought I saw the shape of a smile showing through his scarf. I brought Mr. Krepesky his matzo ball soup in short order. Just as I set down his bowl, I saw Heather waving me over to the register. So there I went. "Hey," she said in an uneven stage whisper. "Listen." "Yeah?" "If you look over there while Mr. Krepesky's eating, keep your cool. If you can't, you take a break. You hear me?" "What are you talking about?" "You got a poker face?" I nodded. "I got a poker face." "Use it." I waited and watched out of the corner of my eye. When he was ready to eat, he unwrapped the scarf from his face. He was half man, half skull. I was shocked, completely shocked. He had no nose, he had no lips, and even if I couldn't see his mouth up close, I would soon learn that my next guess was right on the money. He didn't have a tongue either. There are senses we rely on, but still think unreal. They appear only in singular moments, when fortune's found you in its path and commands you to bet the house, when a mother premonishes her baby crying, when an identical twin feels across county lines and country and knows without being told that their other twin has died. These are the eerie extensions of imperceivable phenomena through the veil, where second sight and sixth senses are lingui francae and "I have a feeling" is the universal creed. I myself had such a feeling. "Am I bothering you?" I said as I hunched beside Mr. Krepesky's table, making plain my intention to sit across from him. Mr. Krepesky shook his head and waved a warm welcome with his kid gloves. I sat down on the booth bench opposite him as Heather half watched from the register. "Nice day, huh?" He shrugged. His eyes were so still that the stillness seemed aggressive, like lights out on the heels of a cell block lockdown. I'd noticed his eyes were blue before, but now it really hit home how pale they were too. Their dark hues were fully drained, depigmented to the cool blue of fractures in glacial ice. Neither had I registered his deformed left pupil. It looked like he'd long ago cried a single black tear, leaving a charcoal streak through the ice blue of his iris. He pointed at my hands, fingernails bitten down to the quick. I hid them under the table and my face flushed candy apple red. "It's a bad habit, I know. I shrank into myself and looked away. "I don't know." I side-eyed Mr. Krepesky while his gaze pierced my side. He knocked on the table. His knuckles sounded like a heartbeat through his gloves. I moved to face him, and his eyes moved something in me. He waved toward himself. No, I don't want you to see them." He waved again, and refusing to surrender, kept his hands hovering over my end of the table. He closed his eyes as he tilted his head to one side. His smile was a grotesque species of serenity. I lifted my hands and held them out to him, palms toward the ceiling to try hiding my nails. He flattened his hands and held them over my wrists. I felt warmth and magnetism, the feeling a little girl gets walking the midway at a state fair, seeing a world of colored light bulbs and sugar-powdered funnel cakes. He gently took my wrists in his hands. His fingers felt strange on my skin as he turned my wrists round, placing my palms flat on the table. I forgot myself and licked my lips, but quickly ate my tongue. I believe in closed-mouth smiles. The tongue is intimate. The tongue is an obscenity. It was a small mercy that I never saw my parents kiss growing up. An arctic wind whispered through the diner from a place where eyeless souls see. Mr. Krepesky took out a stubby pencil marked with faint tooth indentations and a spiral-bound notebook, the sort you see in movies where hard-boiled journalists meet whistleblowers in unlit parking garages. He wrote something on a sheet the size of a get well card, then tore it out and slid it across the table. "I'm not impressed," he'd written. He held up his gloved hands, tugged each shirt sleeve like a magician stunting as a straight shooter. He took off his gloves and laid his hands on the table right next to mine. The tips of his fingers were severed where the nails were supposed to begin, scarred closures that looked like the outside of a worn-in baseball glove. A botched amputation. Had someone done that to him? What mindless butcher. My hands were as close to his as they could be without touching. I stared into his eyes. They had a light that could fill the stopes and shafts of cave-deep coal mines. He wrote something else and slid another sheet across the table. "Fair warning, this is what happens if you keep biting your nails." Then he held up his hands in front of his face and wiggled his mangled fingers. I burst out laughing, and I'm pretty sure, though it was hard to tell without his lips, that he smiled too. I knew right then that I'd made a friend. Late at night, laying on my rented mattress, in my basement apartment below an abandoned sex shop, I wondered about his past. But when I stopped and sat with Mr. Krepesky every time I worked a pre-dawn split shift, I couldn't bring myself to ask those burning questions. Like, wasn't elonguation a punishment for heresy? Wasn't the rhinotomy a game of got-your-nose that Sicilians played with overzealous pimps? And his fingers. Had he toured downtown Tehran and picked the wrong mullah's pocket? Who would do these things to a senior citizen? And what kind of life had this old man lived? I was desperate to know his story, and my mind bloomed wild with the most fertile possibilities. Contemporaneously, I daydreamed Grandpa Abe's resurrection. In my reveries, I saw him visiting the diner while I worked, appraising my hustle while discounting novelty, careful not to treat me like a Girl Scout selling thin mints. I knew Grandpa Abe would have paid more than lip service to my honest day's work. I envisioned him sitting with Mr. Krepesky as I served them sky-high stacks of flapjacks, the two getting along famously, astir with belly laughs and confabulations. Those were the daydreams. But there was also the nightmare. As the city raged across Hedonia's appointed hours, I dreamt of a place that neither woke nor slept. I dreamt of a place of unending winter, a snowy village kept in a black sea of forest, full of black trees and anthracite leaves, pitch-colored bark and crumbling branches. There were huts that were barely homes there, torches lighting the dirt road that wound through them so that balled-up gusts of snow glowed like yellow orbs, wearied mules hitched to ramshackle wagons, drunk and angry masters hoping the beasts would go lame and justify the mercy of their bludgeons, stumblebums in boughs and hedges, soiled Tolstoy shirts with crooked collars made of flax worn by bearded men, their obscure faces breathing ethanol in misty drifts. 100 spirit world witnesses, those seeing eyeless souls. Grandpa Abe and Mr. Krepesky stood side by side in the distance, the both of them stripped naked and shivering in endless night. I looked down and saw I was naked too. Ravens with albatross wings and cantaloupe-sized talons dive-bombed and wrenched both men's eyes from their sockets. My elders bloodily spasmed and shook but stayed rooted to their marks, mouths open alligator-wide, gurgling but not screaming out of their silent, twisted faces. I had that dream at least once a week. When I saw Mr. Krepesky in the diner during my dreams mornings after, I wondered if he remembered my own nightmares, if he'd really been there and seen me and saw me see him. I glided to and from his table with that bug in my ear, dragging my feet in a trespasser's slog. I overcame my unease, overcame myself, and sat with him, joined him in the sunless crypt of the cities every early morning. I told him too much, too fast, and too soon before the sunrise broke. His pencil flew with artful concision, each response as intricate and exacting as if his words were made to measure. While I unburdened myself in a free-flowing stream of consciousness, his written answers were cobbled from a quarry of wisdom, often having the shape and the weight of accidental poetry. We were two rivers, his flowing from a font of tranquility and mine fed from the glut of a storm. A study in contrasts, I've heard it called. And then, one day, the smudged black characters on Mr. Krepesky's notepaper spoke. In actual fact, those letters spoke. His writing became audible, real, and living. It was bizarre, impossible, but I heard it. I heard Krepesky's every notepad scrawl, narrated in my grandfather's cadence. I really heard them, those words. I really heard them spoken. I heard Grandpa Abe speaking Mr. Krepesky's written thoughts. After that, I insinuated myself into all his daily meals, without exception, driven by bizarre compulsion or delusion, becoming an obsessed cherry picker stringing together the disparate strands of Mr. Krepesky's life and Grandpa Abe's, reverse engineering a logic to support tenuous conclusions, placing the cart before the horse, pure sophistry. I racked my mind with hypotheses and conspiracies both elaborate and supernatural. I even considered that Grandpa Abe's spirit might have occupied in whole or in part Mr. Krepesky's ruined body. I examined the cleaved root of his missing tongue, unaccountably searching for evidence of my theories inside his body, feeling an intimacy I'm sure he didn't intend. I considered asking if I could inspect his palate in the same place where Grandpa Abe speared himself with a fork as a child. I never said any of this out loud, of course. There were other problems, too. I was as revolted by his face as I was fascinated by it, and could only hope that time would soften my revulsion. The missing lips were the greatest difficulty. They accentuated the ugly divots that pocked his diseased gums and rendered more pronounced an already skeletal aspect. If you've ever seen Liam Neeson in Darkman. Speed bumps notwithstanding, I spent as much time as I could with Mr. Krepesky. I despaired over him as I'd once despaired for my grandfather, but I knew well enough that I was approaching the borderline of a state of dementedness. Oh yes, I felt demented. I was sure I was demented. Now I know I was only young and naive, and despite a girlhood spent in a cesspit of cynics, not yet jaded, I was a bereft kid trying to sublimate grief through life's ceaseless turmoil, nothing more. But I could not just then get over my obsession, and then, without warning, Mr. Krepesky disappeared. By the middle of September, Mr. Krepesky was missing for 3 weeks. "Maybe he is in hospital?" Edgar said to me through the serving hatch. "He fall or something, go to hospital." "O muerto," Felix added. "Tal vez esté con Jesucristo ahora." "Sí, sí. You think he's dead?" My eyes goggled. Edgar and Felix looked at each other and shrugged at the same time. At the end of my shift, I mulled Mr. Krepesky's absence over with Heather. I bounced hypothetical scenarios off of her, baroque entanglements I imagined to have injured or even killed him. She eyed me from the register the way a DMV clerk might if you interrupted their break. Your guess is as good as mine. He's like everyone else who comes in here, a stranger. How am I supposed to know where strangers go? Do you know where he lives? I asked. Friendly, mean, anything in between. They're all strangers. Heather. None of my business where people go or what they do. Heather. Except that they don't bother me and I don't bother them, except that… Heather! What? God damn it, what? Where does he live? Heather leaned back while crossing her arms and performatively sighing. How would I know that, Reeves? I don't take the kids trick-or-treating at Mr. Krepesky's. Not that I would, the way he looks. I scowled. Hey, she said. Take it easy. I'm not trying to be mean, I'm just saying, come on, you know what I'm saying. I didn't want to admit it, but I did. I still kept pressing her. I mean, I don't know. A billing address? The banks don't show those on the card reader. You know that. She tucked her pen behind her ear and wriggled her nose. Besides, he always pays cash. Lots of old folks don't trust banks. I've got an aunt who still stuffs her mattress. Course, she's still waiting on a revival of the gold standard. Nobody knows anything about him? You told me that one time that he's been coming here for years. Heather shrugged at my question, like Edgar and Felix before her. I worked at the International House of Indifference. Heather, think, please. She squeezed her eyes shut, teased by her flighty memory. After a half-minute of watching her think, I groaned like a sulky teenager. I was being petulant and unhelpful, and I knew it. I softened. It's all right, I said. Maybe if later you remember… Wait! Heather found either a portent or a ketchup stain to exclaim at. What? I said. He goes to this movie theater. Shit, what's it called? It's one of those fancy ones. You know, with like food and booze and shit. One of those shishy places with recliners big enough for foodie beauty. Where is it? I felt like I had to pee. Heather squeezed her eyes shut and pinched the bridge of her nose. Baker Street and Monroe Avenue. It's called… Oh shit, what was it called? She simultaneously snapped her fingers, opened her eyes, and looked at me. Annika Peabody Cinema. He goes there for the matinee. As soon as I finished my shift, I went home and changed. I hurried downtown to Annika Peabody. I didn't remember Annika Peabody Cinema, though I'd been in the neighborhood before, but it must have always been there because the facade was graffitied with 800 generations of pigeon shit, along with the grit of a century of industrial precipitation defacing the marquee. An Art Deco complement of bronze-wrought Norse goddesses with wings and aerodyne cupronickel raptors without them stood sentinel over the concrete decrescence of 100-year acid rain. Annika Peabody's last revamp was probably before the New Deal. Above the box office were incandescent bulbs bouncing light off the brass corner guards that outlined the booth. The ticket taker was trapped in a gold box. There were no movie names on the marquee. Instead, letters were blocked side by side to spell "Free Ticks for Friends." The woman sitting inside the box office was old enough to be a Confederate of Moses. Her spine was so crooked that it hurt my back to look at her. What does that mean? I asked, pointing up at the marquee. It means if you have a friend who goes here, you get a free ticket. Half her teeth were capped in gold crowns with a dark gray tongue hidden behind them. She was the kind of sinister old lady who would fake an injury to assist her sex-trafficking son's plan to kidnap ditzy tourists. I had a bad feeling and disregarded it out of hand. It's up to you to listen to your gut. How do you know if I'm telling the truth? I said. The old woman turned up a hyena smile. Oh, I can always tell. And even if I'm wrong, the theater knows the truth. The theater? Who's your friend? She asked. Krepesky. What's his first name? It was absurd, but I tried to guess. It's… A dry, wheezy cackle cut me off. I'm yanking your chain, honey buns. Krepesky ain't got no first name. Not no more, anyhow. Not unless his name is Mud. Anyone ever tell you you look like Beulah Annan? Who? There was a loud sound like a giant mechanical hole puncher, and the old woman slapped a ticket on my side of the booth's wicket. One for Beulah baby cakes. She drooled a yellow liquid like the serous fluid of a half-healed, oozing wound. The air smelled like a thunderstorm. I looked down at my ticket. What movie is it for? Only ones that's showing. Only ones that ever been shown. I examined the ticket. It was smudged with printer ink. Nothing readable. I looked back up and inside the box office, hoping for an explanation. Nobody was there. The old crone absconded before her voice had a chance to echo. I should have taken her cue and left, too. And do you think I did? Well, I should have. The concession stand and lobby restated the outdoor Art Deco aesthetic. The popcorn smelled of truffle oil and fill dirt after a drizzle. Under the glass display case were a variety of boxed candies I'd never heard of. Missing persons, and hanged men, and ringed and rounded rosies. As likely names of poisons as tooth-rotten confections. Better not to chance it. Inside the auditorium, however, everything was brand spanking new. I sat in a leather recliner and rolled its electric switches till I draped myself like a grape-sucking dilettante nestled in cush. A side table tray popped out from between my seat and the next one over. The rest of the theater was empty. A gaunt man with a comb-over, dressed in a button-down with a bow tie and a shiny red vest, asked me for my order. The aisle lights along the floor made his eye sockets look twice as deep as they were. Oh, I didn't see a menu anywhere, I said, searching around my seat. He grinned a ghoul's grin while leaning in too close for comfort. It's on your phone. What do you mean? The gaunt man pressed his hands together like he was trying to squeeze all the dirty water out of a dish rag. He nodded too fast, and weirdly, like a bobblehead. He grinned like lunatics do at ghosts in padded walls. This was a man who went at the bottom of the pile when people interviewed nannies. I took out my phone and saw an app I'd never seen before, Annika Peabody Treats and Sweet Selection. It was already open. There was no menu, only a yes button. There's only one button. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong, I said. Or maybe it's a glitch. I held my phone up so he could see. Can you show me how to get to the menu? The ghoulish gaunt didn't hear a word I said. His focus was on squeezing his invisible rag and nodding faster than the gesture's meaning allowed. He looked like a bald pound puppy. I thumbed the yes button. The gaunt scuttered off without delay. It was obvious that my phone was a remote control feeding signals to his nervous system. There are dark spots in my memory obscuring the film's beginning, but I'm sure I kept the basic parameters of the storyline. A barkeep was wiping down countertops inside a tavern. His outfit and the tavern's decor hinted at late 1800s Eastern Europe. Just so, the bearded men in fiddlers' caps. Their empty eyes hovered above overfull glasses, and the men radiated the silent discontent of drunks with unscratchable itches and backs bent by hard labor. Occasionally, one would side-eye the barkeep or grumble at another drunk whose stink was too close to their stink. These were men who hated laughter, unless it was them doing the laughing, and only then when it was cruel. The camera quit the barkeep and his sullen patrons, introducing a young girl in a blue dress. She held a white sunflower. My breath was stolen from me. I realized I was looking at my better-kempt doppelganger. We shared the same sharp clavicles and tiny ears, the same caterpillar brows over smoky eyes and deep hollows, the same extra dirty blonde hair, sharp hip bones and ribs protruding with X-ray visibility, all on my same wasted frame. Smash cut to the barkeep and doppelganger meeting in a foggy gray forest. 100 yellow torches glowed through the fog around them, scores of lamplighters hiding in the mist and aching for violation. You could hear dark spirits seething like the turning of the earth. The barkeep and the girl ran toward a village of squat wooden huts. I looked away from the movie screen. The film had a sudden, blaring potency. The light from the projector burnt my eyes. The auditorium smelled of woodsy flames and rainwater-filled flood channels. I held a bag of popcorn that I didn't remember taking. I reached inside the bag and, instead of finding a kernel, plucked out a human tooth with still bloody roots. I wanted to scream but felt like I'd been roofied. There was a translucent child's sippy cup, half emptied and sitting on my tray. I tasted bitter earth, smelled sulfur, felt the chill of a sunless countryside. I was blanketed in stupor. My head swam. On screen, the peasants were rabble-rousing in the tavern. They'd turned like bad meat. They'd captured the barkeep. 3 of the mob held the barman in place, working ropes around his wrists. A huddle of unwashed villagers hemmed them inside a circle, cackling imbecilic cackles. The peasant's leader, a near-toothless brute with forearms like drain pipes, unsheathed a fillet knife. I watched the reel and listened to the projector's deafening whirs and clicks, the sound of a wooden roller coaster dragged by chain lift to its drop. There was an abrupt shift. The projector's noise faded, and what remained was my only reality. Bar stool legs scraping floorboards, whinnying livestock flexing against hitch-tied tack, the whine of creaking ropes and clinking bottles and booze-heavy footfalls. I couldn't hear the projector because the projector wasn't there. I wasn't in the theater. I was inside the tavern. It was real. I was there. They couldn't see me, but I was there. The brute chortled and sounded like a feral pig smoking a cigar. The barkeep bucked against the ropes until his wrists bled, while a knife was lowered between his lips and nose. I shrieked and I screamed. Oh God, did I scream? Like a banshee. My screaming reopened a wormhole. In the blink of an eye, I was sitting in my movie theater seat again. I watched through the fourth wall as the edge of the fillet knife kissed the columella of the barkeep's nose, and I was terrified, even as the layer of cue marks over the reel's images reminded me that I was here and now, and not there and then. Seconds that felt like hours rolled into minutes that felt like days as beasts in sleeves and trousers disfigured the barkeep at their leisure. They went to work on his fingers after his face, before turning their attention at last to the delicacies of the male anatomy. I retched. Wet earth choked my airway, mixed with blood, stink, and smoke. My jeans dribbled with wet warmth, though the theater's frigid air chilled the urine seeping through them in no time at all. I fell from my seat, but wasn't sure if I'd done it on purpose. I had a notion to book it once I had feeling in my legs. I faltered. Time was uneven, trailing behind itself, swelling in reverse delays. Its dilation was audible and harsh, like an old dial-up modem. I buckled a few times, but managed up to my knees, and then, with great effort, back on my feet. I swayed and prayed for intervention from any corner. I faced the movie screen and saw, through the acid flicker of projection, the now mutilated barkeep. And what must be obvious to anyone reading this only became apparent to me just then. I was watching Mr. Creepypasta's story. I'd salivated at secret succulence and taken my greedy bite, but once tasted, those terrible truths sat rotten on my tongue. My tongue. He wrapped the scarf round his face like a balaclava, pulled his gloves tight over swollen and bloody fingers. It was him. I was a deluded fool. I'd shown him my tongue. I couldn't look away. I stood and watched a scene of Mr. Creepypasta carrying my doppelganger's body through the black forest. He reached a brokerage of Old Scratch, the home of a witch. He made his plea to the hideous termagant while she evilly smiled from her woodland throne. A boneyard of snakes and rats littered the ground at her feet, potions and decoctions heaped on crooked shelves around her, runes and knuckle bones scattered at 6s and 7s, a cornering of occult desecrations. He begged, snot and blood bubbling from his face's sopping wounds, sticking to my changeling's cadaver in gloppy fluid strings. His head sat on her breast between racking fits of sorrow before he flung the clotted stumps of docked fingers toward the moonlit sky. It was a rebuke of I am that I am sovereignty, a feat of cosmic sedition. As cinema went, the gesture had no equal. And then, I realized, the witch, the vile enchantress. I recognized her. It was the crooked-spined ticket-taker. He stripped naked before the witch, his lank body's unblemished skin delimiting his mutilations. The witch held a black turnip in her hands. She urged him, quite sweetly, to gnaw its roots, and he did. I started crying. The witch smeared his naked flesh with shreds of living bat's wings, anointed him in slime and ash. She slit her palm and dribbled blood the color of waste into his open mouth. He was baptized into the spiritual congregation of the Black Mass. After the rites, she swiveled on her throne and stared at me through the silver screen. The witch pointed at me and asked, "This is the girl." Creepypasta nodded through his tears. His trembling, ruined fingers pushed out from the screen, testing the diaphragm between realities. Mr. Creepypasta was recruiting me as a party to his atrocity, but I was me, and had a feeling if I joined him that would change. His swindle was self-evident. Creepypasta wasn't like my grandfather at all. He was a shadow that crawled in the closet, the fork in the road locals knew not to take. The final insanity before disaster, and if I embraced him even once, knowing what he was, I'd never be myself again. I found my legs beneath me. I backed my way up the aisle while still watching through my retreat. Creepypasta's village of mindless persecutors could be seen broiling in towers of flames my mind could not erase. The peasant leader's skin crackled and fried and melted on his face. Fire, bacon, and sewage were thick as bricks in the theater air. By the time I heard the women and children screaming, I was already running away from there. All of this happened years ago. So you may wonder why I'm only writing about it now. The truth is that I haven't had a reason to, not until quite recently. I escaped Annika Peabody Cinema and was the last to know its name. Heather said she'd never mentioned such a place, and no one anywhere has ever heard of it. I looked and looked again, but the building left no trace. There is a movie theater in the same neighborhood called Forum Theater, but Forum was never located at the intersection of Baker and Monroe, because Baker and Monroe, in fact, do not intersect. Either way, the point is moot. Forum Theater is gone now too, turned into bohemian apartment rentals for white-collar kids working their first gig after college. I don't live in a basement anymore. I have a condominium. And though I still visit Edgar and Felix at the diner that they now own, and ask after Heather, who moved to North Carolina with her ex-husband, where she's rumored to raise alpacas, I haven't waitressed in a minute. I have an online shop that sells old films on VHS and DVD, and being my own boss suits me fine. But no, I never once came across the Krepesky film again. It was only in the very recent past that I thought of any of these events, now years distant and gone. Because over the course of the last few weeks, I have woken to find each morning on the floor mat outside my condominium door a white sunflower. And just today, when I went to the bathroom to put on my face, I noticed something in my eye, a black streak running from my pupil through my iris, like I'd cried a single charcoal tear.